A body hit the dirt hard enough to knock the breath loose. Boots scrambled. A wolf snarled and broke sideways, ignoring the sharp command thrown after it. The crowd along the tree line leaned in, waiting for the fall, and the fall came. She went down on one knee in the mud, arms flailing, and let a gasp tear out of her throat like the pain was real. It wasn't. Every stumble was a lie. Every fumble was on purpose. She had practiced looking weak for years. Marin Vasquez was the strongest wolf in that clearing, and she was throwing the trial one clumsy mistake at a time, because the prize for winning was a lifetime chained to the man who broke her sister. But one alpha in the crowd wasn't buying the act. What did he do when he saw straight through her? Stay with me on this one. Now let me back up and tell you how she got there. For 9 years, Marin had been the pack healer. Not the strongest wolf, not the fastest, the healer. The quiet one who set bones and steeped bitter roots and knew which mushrooms killed and which ones saved. That was the whole point. A healer was useful, but a healer was never a threat. Nobody watched a healer. Nobody put a healer in the ring. And that suited her fine because the last thing Marin wanted was to be watched. She was good at it too. That was the part that hurt. She could feel a fracture through skin the way you feel a knot in a rope. She knew, from the color of a wound, how many days a wolf had left and whether those days would be kind. Pack members came to her at all hours, and she stitched them and dosed them and sent them home, and not one of them ever guessed that the hands doing the mending could have crushed the bones instead. That was the trade she'd made with herself a long time ago. Be useful, be gentle, be forgettable, stay alive. Here's the thing about the Silvercrest pack. They measured a wolf's worth by teeth and speed, and they crowned that worth once a year at the Luna trial. The strongest unmated female ran the tests under the autumn blood moon, and whoever won was bound to the air. Bound. Married in wolf terms, but heavier than any human word for it. A Luna bond couldn't be broken. Not by distance. Not by cruelty. Not by anything short of death. And the heir this year was Corwin Silvercrest. Marin knew exactly what Corwin was because she'd stitched her own sister back together after him. Alara had been the Luna 2 years running. Alara had been bright and loud and unafraid, and Corwin had taken all 3 of those things out of her one bruise at a time. Marin had counted the injuries. A cracked wrist he called an accident. 2 ribs he called clumsiness. A split lip Alara laughed off badly, the way you laugh when you've been told to laugh. And at the end, the fall down the ravine that he called a tragedy and everyone else called grief, and that Marin, who read wounds the way other people read faces, called murder. She'd washed her sister's body herself. That was pack custom, and while she worked she'd read the whole story off the cold skin. The bruises on the forearms that come from being gripped, not from falling. The mark at the back of the neck. A body that falls by accident lands one way. A body that's thrown lands another. Alara had been thrown. Marin was as sure of it as she'd ever been sure of anything. She never proved it. You don't prove things against an heir. But she knew. And she promised her sister's cold face, right there in the dark, that Corwin Silvercrest would never own another Vasquez woman as long as Marin breathed. Which brought her to the problem. Marin was strong. Not a little strong. Freakishly, quietly, terrifyingly strong, the kind of strength that ran in her blood the same way it had run in Alara's. If she ran that trial honestly, she'd win it. And winning meant Corwin, so for years she'd played small. She'd let her muscles look soft under loose clothes. She'd lost foot races on purpose to pups half her size. She'd gotten so good at being underestimated that some mornings she almost believed it herself. But this year, the elders looked at the list of eligible females, and Marin's name was on it, and there was no polite way off. An unmated female of age ran the trial. That was law. She could refuse, and refusing meant exile, and exile meant leaving behind the only grave she had left to tend. She'd weighed a life alone in the wild against a life spent within reach of the man who'd killed her sister, and every time she came back to the same answer. She couldn't leave Alara in the ground alone, so she stayed, and she made a different plan. She would run the trial, and she would lose it. Loudly, believably in front of everyone, she'd trip on the tracking run. She'd drop the strength stone. She'd make her guard Wolf, a scarred old gray named Thistle who'd followed her since he was a starving pup, pretend to break command. Aluna had to control her wolf. If Thistle wouldn't obey, no one would ever bind her to the air. They'd write her off as weak, and weak was safe, and safe was all she'd ever wanted. The morning of the trial, she knelt by Thistle and pressed her forehead to his. "You know what to do," she whispered. "When I say heel, you run. When I say still, you thrash. Make it good, old man, make it ugly." Thistle licked her cheek once, and she chose to believe he understood. He'd learned the whole ugly routine over 3 weeks of quiet practice out past the Deadwood line, and he'd learned it because he trusted her, and she tried not to think too hard about asking that of him. Around her neck she wore the one thing she'd allow herself, a flat copper token, worn smooth, stamped with her sister's initial. Alara had pressed it into her hand the night she died, and Marin hadn't taken it off since. She tucked it under her collar so no one would see, and she walked out to the Hollow Pines clearing to lose the most important contest of her life. The clearing was already full. The whole pack ringed it, and behind them stood something Marin hadn't counted on: visitors. A delegation from Ironbark, the neighboring pack, invited for the season of alliance-making. She saw their banners first, dark green and iron gray. Then she saw the man at the front of them, and something in her chest went very still. He was tall in a way that didn't announce itself, broad through the shoulders, with the loose readiness of a wolf who never needed to prove he was dangerous. He wasn't watching the elders or the air or the fire. He was watching her, only her. And the moment their eyes met, Marin felt a cold prickle of warning crawl up her spine, because that was not the look of a stranger admiring a healer. That was the look of a man reading a page. She made herself look away. She rolled her shoulders like they were tight, breathed like she was nervous. But she could feel his attention on the side of her face the whole time, steady as a hand, and it rattled her more than the crowd, more than Corwin's laugh. In 9 years, no one had looked at her like that. 9 years of careful nothing, and this stranger had walked in an hour ago and aimed himself straight at the thing she'd buried. She didn't know his name yet. She'd learn it soon enough. Dorian Kale, Alpha of Ironbark, and the one person in that clearing she had never planned for. The elders called the first test, and Marin got to work being weak. The tracking run came first. A scent trail through the pines, 1/2 mile of switchbacks. Marin could have run it blind. Instead she started slow, let 2 younger women pass her, and at the 3rd turn she caught her toe on a root she'd seen coming from 10 strides away and went down in a heap. The crowd made that soft sound crowds make, poor thing. She got up limping, finished last, and kept her face pinched with effort so no one would see the effort was all pretend. She let herself glance at the Ironbark line. Dorian hadn't moved. But his head had tilted just slightly, the way a man tilts his head when the story he's being told stops matching the one he can see. No admiration in it, no pity, none of the soft dismissal she got from everyone else. Just a careful, patient watching. She hated it. It felt like being weighed. The strength test was worse to fake. They brought out the stone, a river boulder bound in old rope, and each woman had to lift it clear of the ground and carry it to the marker. Marin had lifted heavier, hauling deadwood. She wrapped her arms around it, set her legs, and made a great show of straining. Her face went red. Her arms shook. And at the exact moment the elders leaned in, she let the stone slip and drop to the earth with a thud, and she staggered back, clutching her hands like they were ruined. Gasps. Somebody laughed. Corwin, from his place of honor near the fire, laughed loudest of all, and the sound of it made her stomach turn, because it was the same lazy, cruel laugh she'd heard through the walls the nights Alara came home broken. She kept her eyes down. She had learned in 9 years exactly how to keep her eyes down while a man like that laughed. 2 tests down, 1 to go, the obedience test, the one where Thistle would seal it. The gray wolf padded to her side and she raised her hand and called the command sharp and clear. Heel. And Thistle, bless his scarred old heart, did exactly what they'd rehearsed. He bolted. He tore across the clearing in the wrong direction, snapping at the air, ignoring her while she called him back with a voice she made sure cracked on the second try. A Luna who couldn't hold her own wolf was no Luna at all. It was over. She'd failed on purpose publicly, completely, and no one could ever bind her to Corwin now. She let her shoulders sag. Relief moved through her like warm water. She'd won by losing. She was free. That was when Dorian Kale stepped into the ring. He didn't ask permission. Alphas don't. He walked across the churned mud until he stood between Maren and the elders, and the whole clearing went quiet the way a forest goes quiet before weather. He looked at the elders, then the air. Then he turned to Maren, and when he spoke, his voice carried without him raising it at all. "That woman threw every test in this ring," he said, "and she did it better than anyone here can see." The silence cracked open into noise. Maren's blood went to ice. She opened her mouth to protest, to laugh it off, and Dorian's dark eyes cut to her and held, and the tiny shake of his head was so slight only she caught it. "Don't," that look said. "It's too late for the act." "Ridiculous," Corwin snapped, on his feet now. She fell twice. She dropped the stone. Her own dog won't mind her. "Her dog," Dorian said mildly, "ran the second she released the command. Watch the animal, not the woman. It didn't panic, it performed, and so did she." He turned back to the elders. "By your own law, the trial names the strongest unmated female. You've been shown a lie and asked to reward it, so I claim her myself, under the old right of challenge between packs. Maren Vasquez runs no more of your tests. She comes to Ironbark as mine, or your heir takes me in the ring for the right to keep her here. If you've never heard 400 wolves stop breathing at once, I hope you never do. It's a terrible sound. It's the sound of a plan you spent years building coming apart in a single sentence. And then, strangely, it was quiet. The elders withdrew to confer. The crowd's roar dropped to a low murmur. Corwin stalked off toward his father, spitting fury. And Maren found herself at the edge of the clearing with Thistle pressed against her leg and the copper token cold against her chest, and for one long moment nothing happened at all. The danger seemed to pause. The fire crackled. Someone handed her a cup of water and she actually drank it. She let herself think, absurdly, that maybe this stranger had just done what she couldn't. Maybe it was over. Maybe she was safe. She should have known better. The elders came back. The oldest of them, a white-muzzled woman named Surith, raised her hand for silence, and the news she brought was not the news Maren wanted. "The right of crossback challenge stands," Surith said, "but it does not stand alone." Her eyes found Maren, and there was something almost like pity in them. If 2 alphas claim 1 female and she is of trial age, she does not simply go to the stronger. She chooses, in the ring, between them, tonight under the blood moon. And whoever she does not choose has the right to contest her choice with blood. The words rearranged everything Maren thought she'd escaped. This wasn't over. It had just become something else entirely. She'd walked in trying to lose a contest. Now she was the contest. Corwin was going to fight for the right to own her out of pure spite, and the stranger who'd exposed her was going to fight to take her to a pack she'd never seen, and either way, before the moon set, someone was going to bleed on her account. And the worst part, the part that made her hands finally shake, was this. Corwin had heard it too. He turned and looked at her across the fire, and he smiled, slow and satisfied, because he just understood the same thing she had. Whatever game this Ironbark Alpha was playing, Corwin now had a reason to kill him, and Corwin had never in his life needed more than a reason. Dorian crossed to her before the elders had finished dispersing. Up close he was even bigger than he'd looked, but he didn't loom. He stopped an arm's length away, giving her the space which she noticed, which she filed away. "You've made everything worse," she said, low and furious. "I had it handled, I was free. Do you understand what you just did?" "I understand exactly what I did." His voice was quiet, meant only for her. "You didn't have it handled, you had it delayed. You think a man like Corwin lets the strongest bloodline in this pack walk away because she dropped a rock. He'd have found a reason to bind you inside a year. I've watched him for one afternoon and I already know that. You've watched him for years. Tell me I'm wrong." She couldn't. That was the thing. And the fact that he'd seen in an afternoon what she'd spent years pretending not to know made her want to hit him and thank him in the same breath. She thought about all the nights she'd told herself the plan was airtight, and about the small, cold voice at the back of her mind that had always whispered a man who'd killed once to keep a Vasquez wouldn't be stopped by a stumble. She'd shouted that voice down for weeks. Dorian had just said it out loud in front of 400 people. "Why?" she said instead. "Why would you do this? You don't know me, I'm nothing to you, a healer from a pack that isn't yours." Dorian looked at her for a long moment. "Because I watched you carry a stone you could have thrown across this clearing and set it down gently so no one would know. A person doesn't hide strength like that unless someone taught them that strength gets you hurt." Something moved behind his eyes, old and private. "I know what that costs. And I'd rather fight your heir tonight than watch it cost you the rest of your life." Before she could answer, a scream tore across the clearing. "If you're still with me, and I hope you are because this is exactly where it turns, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This story is about to show you what Maren was really hiding, and I don't want you to miss it." The scream came from the healer's den. Maren was moving before she'd finished thinking, Thistle a gray streak beside her, Dorian a half step behind. She shoved through the door and stopped cold. A young pack member, a boy named Ren who ran errands for the elders, lay crumpled by her work table with blood sheeting down his temple. And standing over him, holding a clay jar of her medicines, was one of Corwin's men. "He said the heir wanted the poisons," the man said, too fast, too guilty. "He said get the Vasquez woman's jars, the ones she keeps for the killing roots. He said." He didn't finish. He dropped the jar and ran. Maren knelt by Ren and had her hands on the wound before her knees hit the floor, and even through the fear, part of her mind went cold and clear and did the math. Corwin didn't want her poisons to poison someone. Corwin wanted her poisons found in her den, so that when the Ironbark Alpha died in the ring tonight, there'd be a story ready. The healer dabbles in death. The outsider fell to the heir's blade, and who's to say he hadn't been dosed, weakened, hexed by the woman he tried to steal? Corwin wasn't just going to fight Dorian. He was building a lie to make sure that even if the fight went wrong, Maren burned for it. "He's not trying to win," she said, pressing cloth to Ren's head. "He's trying to make sure I lose no matter who's standing at the end. If Dorian dies, I'm a witch who weakened him. If he lives, I'm a witch who tried." She looked up, and for the first time she let Dorian see all of it, the strength and the fear and the years of both. "This is what he does. He doesn't beat you. He builds a story where you were always going to fall, and by the time the fight comes, everyone already believes it. That's what he did to Alara. By the time she was gone, half this pack already thought she was reckless, clumsy, unlucky. He spent 2 years teaching them that, so when she died, the story was already written. Nobody even had to lie. They just remembered what he'd taught them to remember." Dorian crouched beside her. He didn't flinch from the blood. He watched her hands work sure and fast, and she saw him revise whatever picture he'd had of her upward again. "Then we don't fight his fight," he said. "We fight ours, and we do it where everyone can see so there's no room left for his story." He nodded at Ren at her hands. "You're not going to hide tonight, Maren, Not the fear, not the strength. You've spent years teaching this pack you're weak. Tonight you're going to teach them all at once that they were wrong. It's the only thing he can't build a lie around. The truth, in front of 400 witnesses. She wanted to say it was madness. The whole architecture of her survival had been never being seen. 9 years of careful nothing, and he wanted her to undo it in one night, in front of the whole pack, with her sister's killer watching. But Wren's blood was slowing under her fingers, and across the clearing the blood moon was climbing red over the pines, and she understood that the man beside her had just handed her the one thing she'd never let herself want: permission to stop pretending. "If I do this," she said quietly, "there's no going back to Small, not ever. They see it once, they never unsee it." "No," Dorian agreed, "they don't. That's the whole idea." They came for her at moonrise. The clearing had been cleared to bare earth, ringed with torches, the whole pack shoulder to shoulder in the red light. The elders stood at the north edge. Corwin waited at the south, stripped to the waist, rolling his shoulders, that lazy smile still on his face. Dorian stood at Marin's side at the west edge, and Surith's voice rose over the crowd. "The female chooses," Surith called. "Step to the alpha you claim, and the other may contest it with blood or yield." Marin stepped forward. She could feel every eye. She could feel the copper token against her chest, and she walked in front of all of them to Dorian Kale and stopped at his shoulder and turned to face the air. Corwin's smile widened. "I contest," he said before she'd finished turning, "and I'll enjoy it." He came fast, faster than Alara ever could have run from him. He crossed the ring and swung for Dorian, and Dorian met him, and the two of them went into it hard, and the crowd roared. For a few seconds it was just what everyone expected. Two alphas evenly matched. Corwin was strong. He was cruel and quick, and he fought dirty, going for eyes and throat, and he caught Dorian across the jaw and opened a cut that ran red down his neck. And here's where Corwin made his mistake. He'd built his whole plan around Marin being weak. Around Marin being a healer who dabbled in poison because she couldn't win a fair fight. It never once occurred to him that the woman at the edge of the ring was the strongest wolf in the clearing, and that she'd been given permission to stop pretending. Corwin got Dorian down, pinned him, one hand on his throat, the other pulling back for the blow that ends a challenge, and he looked up at Marin while he did it, because that was the whole point. He wanted her to watch, the way he'd wanted Alara to watch every time. "Watch, healer," he said. "Watch me take him apart the way I took." He didn't finish the sentence. He never got to say her sister's name. Marin crossed the ring in 3 strides. No stumble, no fumble, no pretend effort. She moved the way she'd never once let this pack see her move, low and fast and certain, and she caught Corwin's raised arm at the wrist and stopped it dead. Just stopped it. His whole weight, his whole strength, and her hand closed around his wrist and held it in the air like it was nothing, because for her it was. The clearing went silent. Corwin turned his head and stared at her hand on his arm, at the way it didn't shake, at the way his own straining muscles couldn't move it an inch, and for the first time in his life, something crossed his face that Marin had waited 2 years to see. Doubt. "You," he said. "Me," she said. And she wrenched his arm sideways and threw him off Dorian, and Corwin's silver crest, heir of the pack, went through the air and hit the earth on his back hard enough to knock the breath loose. Same as the fall she'd faked hours ago, except there was nothing faked about this one. He scrambled up, and now there was no lazy smile, now there was only fury, and he threw himself at her instead of at Dorian, which was exactly the mistake she needed him to make. Because a fight with Dorian was a fight the pack could argue about later. A fight with her on full display was a truth Corwin couldn't build a story around. He swung. She caught it. He swung again, and she turned it aside and drove her shoulder into his chest and put him back on the ground, and she wasn't cruel about it. She was just relentless, the way water is relentless. Every blow he'd landed on Alara, every bruise Maren had counted and stitched and grieved. She paid it back not with rage, but with the calm, awful certainty of someone who had finally stopped being afraid. He was strong. She was stronger, and she'd always been stronger, and the strangest part was how quiet it felt, now that it was finally happening. She got him down and put her knee on his chest and her hand around his throat, mirror to how he'd held Dorian, and she leaned down close so the whole clearing could see she wasn't hiding anything anymore. "My sister's name was Alara," she said. "You said it was a fall. I washed her body. I counted the wounds. I knew it was you, and I promised her you'd never own a Vasquez woman again." She pulled the copper token out from under her collar and held it up, catching the red moonlight so everyone could see the letter stamped into it. "You don't get to say her name. You don't get to win, and you were never ever going to have me." She could have killed him. Everyone in that clearing understood in that moment that she could have, and that she'd chosen not to. She stood up and stepped back and let him lie there in the mud, gasping, ruined not in body, but in the one thing an heir like Corwin couldn't survive losing: the story. The pack had watched their weakest wolf turn out to be their strongest, and watched their heir get thrown around a ring by a healer, and no lie he built after tonight would ever stick again. Surith stepped forward, her old face unreadable. She looked at Corwin in the dirt. She looked at Dorian, bleeding but standing. And she looked longest at Maren, at the copper token still swinging from her fist. "The female has chosen," Surith said, "and she has answered the contest herself. There is no more challenge to bring." She paused, and something almost like a smile moved the corner of her mouth. "The trial names the strongest unmated female." It seems it did after all. They let her go. That was the strangest part in the days after. The pack that had spent 9 years believing Maren Vasquez was a soft-handed healer let her walk out of the Hollow Pines clearing at Dorian Kale's side, and nobody raised a hand to stop her because everybody had seen, and you cannot unsee a truth like that. Corwin's father, the old Alpha, stripped his son of the heir's title before the moon set, not out of justice, out of arithmetic. An heir who could be thrown around a ring by a healer was an heir no one would follow, and a pack runs on the story it believes about its leaders. Corwin left Silvercrest within the month. Maren never learned where he went and found, to her mild surprise, that she didn't need to. For 2 years she'd imagined 100 endings for him, most of them bloody. When it finally came, the ending that mattered wasn't blood at all. It was the whole pack watching him lose and knowing and remembering. That was worse for a man like Corwin than any wound she could have given him. She went to Alara's grave before she left. She knelt in the cold and pressed the copper token to the earth, and then, after a moment, pressed it back to her own chest, because some things you carry not out of grief but out of love. "It's done," she told her sister. "He's finished, and I don't have to be small anymore." Thistle sat beside her the whole time, and when she finally stood, he stood too, and they walked out of Silvercrest together toward the Ironbark line. Dorian was waiting where the trees thinned. He'd let her have the grave alone, which she noticed, the way she noticed everything about him now. "You said there'd be something you wanted in return," she said. "When you claimed me, you never told me what." He looked at her for a long moment in the gray morning light. "I know what you thought I meant," he said. "You thought I was buying you, trading one bond for another. A better cage maybe, but a cage." He shook his head. "Here's what I want, Maren. I want you to come to Ironbark as a free wolf. Not my Luna, not my prize, not anything you don't choose out loud on your own, no trial forcing your hand. Be our healer if you want it. Be more if you decide you want that too. Or take a season, go your own way, and I'll walk you to the border myself and wish you well." He almost smiled. "I claimed you to get you out of that ring. Whatever comes after, you claim yourself. That's the only price. That's the whole price. And Maren, who had spent her entire adult life certain that being seen meant being hurt, stood in the cold morning and understood that this man had seen her more clearly than anyone alive, and had used it not to own her but to hand her back to herself. She didn't answer him with a grand speech. Storytellers like me want to give you one, but that's not how she was. She just reached up and tucked the copper token under her collar where it had always lived, and she started walking toward Ironbark, and she let him fall into step beside her without being told. It was the first choice in 9 years that was hers alone. She'd walked into that clearing to lose on purpose, to stay small, to survive by disappearing. She walked out of it the strongest wolf in 3 packs, seen down to the bone and free. And that, believe me, was a fall worth taking.